Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, leadership webinar in our series, leadership webinar series, entitled Leading in Times of Complexity. My name is Georgia Sinclair. I am the Senior Manager, Leadership Development here at Mine, and it really is a pleasure to have so many of you, again, continue to show your interest in this in leadership development, for taking the time out to invest in another opportunity for further growth and development. We have an exciting presentation for you today. James Clemens is one of our leading leadership development consultants, and he will lead us in that topic of leading in times of complexity. I will introduce James a little further on very shortly. But once again, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to hand over now to Diana Morris, who's our Director for Finance, HRM, and Administration, who's going to bring some opening remarks on behalf of our CEO, Dr. Ruby Brown. Diana?
Thank you, Giorgio. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the CEO, Dr. Ruby Brown, and the entire Mine team, welcome to the second in our series of Mine's leadership webinars for the 22-23 financial year. Mine continues to create avenues and lead conversations on developing strong leadership culture and the role that it plays within the public sector and to some degree, the private sector. The Mine Leadership Webinar Series are offered free of charge as part of our commitment to reach as many persons as possible to impress on them the know-how and understanding of leading in times of complexity, which is the topic of today's webinar. Our presenter, Mr. James Clemens, whom you will hear more about shortly, will provide an excellent insight into our topic for today's webinar. James will provide us with a strategic leadership model to assist in assessing the type of problems we are likely to face and how to make better leadership decisions. I implore you to stay engaged, as James is a leadership consultant that comes to us with a wealth of experience and has a lot to offer on this very important topic. I am sure that if you do so, at the end of this session, we will be empowered to be more impactful leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I thank you for coming, and we look forward to hosting you for all your training needs and developmental interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. And without much further ado, we are going to move right into the reason why you're here. And I'm going to introduce you to our presenter today, James Clemens, for whom many of us, James has been with us and we are very, very familiar with James. So James has over 20 years of professional experience in leadership development, learning strategy, design, delivery, and management, and organizational change and effectiveness. He has worked with a number of organizations in the Canadian public and non-government sectors, and has also shared his expertise internationally. He began his public service career in 2000 with the Department of Human Resources Development, Canada. In 2001, he was invited to join the Canadian Centre for Management Development to design and manage its flagship Executive Leadership Development Program. In 2006, he was then asked to manage and lead the design of the Canada's School of Public Services Advanced Leadership Program, an international leadership development program for assistant deputy ministers and other high potential senior public sector leaders. Since 2010, James has continued to work as a management consultant with a variety of public and non-government sector organizations to design and deliver leadership programming, as well as provide strategic advice related to the organizational strategy and change. He has contributed his expertise both within Canada and internationally, including in the UK, United States, Kenya, India, Jamaica, and throughout the Caribbean. Having played a leadership role as a former member of the Canadian Forces Reserves, James has experience working in both civilian and military environments. He's a university graduate from Mount Allison University and the University of Ottawa, and holds a master's degree from Indiana University. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our presenter, James Clemens.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and I do see some familiar names down. I look up and down the participant list, so wonderful to have you here. I also realized as I was watching the video of my recorded little interview prior to the session that I was wearing the same shirt I'm wearing today, and I had to stop myself from running upstairs and putting on a different shirt out of fear that you might think that I only own one. Which isn't true. I own 5, one for each day of the week. Actually, I own a few more than that too. But whenever I go to Jamaica, it's interesting because I have the same pants and shirts. I just used to sort of pick it up, put it in your suitcase, and off you go. So I used to be going down to the Caribbean so often that that packing my bag became routine. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, I haven't been able to enjoy the warmth of the islands quite as much, and hopefully that will change now in the few years coming forward, because I do enjoy working with you. Every time I deliver a course in Canada, I end up telling a story about delivering courses in the Caribbean, and how when I say good morning in the Caribbean, I hear this chorus of good morning coming back at me. And it's a great way to start the morning. And when I start my courses in Canada, about 1 or 2 people mumble something that is unintelligible. And so I have to tell them that I would like them to say good morning like my friends in the Caribbean do. So always very warm a reception when I'm there. So what are we doing today? We are going to be looking at leading through times of complexity. And that short little video gave a little bit of insight, or not insight, but a preface into what that what this is going to be all about. And I probably have a lot more material than I have time for, and that's fine. I have sort of some core material that I'm going to get us to go through, and if we have time, I have other things as well. But really, we're going to be taking a look primarily at what adaptive leadership is and how it can help you to navigate the perpetual VUCA context. I'm going to talk a little bit more about VUCA, what it is. I'll unpack that a little bit. Many of you probably already heard that term, but if not, it will resonate with you. Then going to distinguish between 4 different types of problems that leaders face. Not all problems are created equal, and really that's going to be the core of what we're going to be looking at today, which is how do we distinguish between different types of problems, and then what is the leadership response to those as well. And then we'll apply a strategic model to assist you in assessing the types of problems you face and make better leadership decisions. And if we have time, we'll look at how we can apply an emergent strategy when working with complexity as well. So, all throughout, if you have questions, Georgia is going to be monitoring the chat box and the hands on my behalf, because the number of things, I always feel like I'm almost in the cockpit of a plane trying to navigate with all the controls and screens on my computer. So always helpful to have an extra set of eyes. So thank you, Georgia, for taking care of that. And Georgia will also be taking care of a few polls that we have to keep us engaged. So living in a VUCA world, let's talk a little bit about this first. So a somewhat traditional dominant view of leadership. So let's take a look at least since World War II, before World War II, the industrial age, The idea has been to be an effective leader, you must maintain stability and equilibrium in your team, in your organization. In other words, everyone needs to be in the boat, we need to be rowing in the same direction. The system or context of your work is predictable, and we must understand all of the variables. So information is power, because power helps me understand what is happening so I can predict it, and therefore, if I can predict it, therefore I can control it. And so the goals of financial action can be addressed with the better problem solving, and therefore we just need to be managed better. The idea is that it's very much a follow the leader type paradigm of leadership. And so I'm going to just open up poll number 1. And so Georgia, perhaps you can launch poll number 1. I'm going to read through the question, and let's see what people come up with in their answer. So the question is, in the context of the world in 2023, what does the acronym VUCA stand for? Let's see what people say. All right, I see there's a clear lead on this. I didn't make this easy. And it's a bit tricky because there are a number of things that since the pandemic have shifted in organizations and values in organizations. And that is not, and while they're true, it's not necessarily the VUCA that we're talking about. But
I would say number 5.
So a vertical, uniform, closed, and accountable? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Virtual, universal, centralized, accelerated. I would say that.
All right.
I say number 2.
Number 2.
Yeah.
Volatile.
Virtual, unique.
Voted for 2 as well.
Okay. So we're going to give about 5 more seconds for those who haven't had a chance to respond yet. And then
Our number one could work.
Number 1?
Yeah.
I'm seeing some
Because
people.
we have to adjust. Yeah.
I was going to point out, I think, is that although you said go ahead and respond, I'm not sure if everyone voted on the screen.
Yeah, I'm noticing
some of why you're getting the conversation.
Yeah.
Is that okay with you? I'm just asking.
I'm okay with it because this isn't. It's
Okay.
not like we're taking a survey that's going to matter.
Okay.
That's all right. But if you do want to click next to one, feel free. I'll give you about 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to stop the poll. And that's all right. So here we go. I'm going to end the poll now. It's okay if you didn't get a chance to respond. So here we go. I'm ending the poll. And Georgia, are we able to show the results? And I hear I'm getting a message, my internet connection is a little unstable, so I apologize for that.
Yes, James.
So,
Are you seeing it on the screen?
I am, but I always see it. I don't know if others can see it. Can others see it?
Yes, we're
Okay.
seeing it.
Yes, we're seeing it. We're seeing it.
Okay. We have about 4 people who said A, variable, unequal, coincidental, and adjusted. Certainly there are elements of that that are true. I think variable and unequal, undoubtedly. We have most people who went for a B, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which in the literature is the correct answer for this. But interestingly, I didn't want it to be too easy. So I did put valued, unique, creative, and accepting, which if we take a look at the discourse in organizations now, and we've heard of, especially in the United States, Europe, the Great Resignation, how employees are have changed values. and so they're leaving jobs where the environment may have been toxic initially. So we are seeing some of those values come out. So it's not, that was a bit of a trick question because it's grounded in some truth as well. So if you voted for that one, you may just be a little bit ahead of your time. Virtual, universal, centralized, and accelerated. Again, that was a bit of a trick question because we just finished and we're going to remain in, I think, a somewhat virtual world in some ways or another. Being unique and creative is and accepting, sorry, I'm in the wrong one. Universal is, we are certainly now broadening our view of the world. Centralized, some things are starting to, start coming back in, and absolutely everything feels like it's accelerated. But the primary answer here is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit about what that means. Whoops! I should let Georgia do her job and not try and do it for her. We're clicking at cross purposes. So we can close that screen. You may need to click on the little X in the top corner to do that. But let's talk a little bit about, I talked about the traditional view of leadership. The leadership reality, the one that I just talked about, is on the left. What it looks like. What does it look like for a number? We're at the top. Leaders are at the top. People follow the leader. The leader should have the answers and be guiding and directing the organization and social change and various movements. That's a little bit more of the traditional view. But any of us that are in leadership roles know that when you walk in every day, it feels a little bit more of what's on the right. Right? It's like this mess, it's this spaghetti. I'm not quite sure what is going to come at me today. And whatever comes at me today, I'm not sure if I'm going to have the answers. I don't know where the answers are. We're going to have to find the answers. We're not even sure if when we find the answers, if they will be the right answers. So that's the leadership reality that we're facing. And that is increasing, month by month as well. So we're in what we call the VUCA world. So the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it feels a lot like being in a time of that permanent white water. Right? We're having to surf the wave a bit. We're never quite sure when it's going to be crashing down. And while we can see where it might be going, it can also change direction at any time. So this is really the context you need to learn to navigate in, is this constant feeling of white water. So volatile, which is the V in VUCA, in this white water environment, is really about, it's that quality of being subject to frequent and rapid and significant change. There are small triggers that can result in quite large changes. And so it's almost like a spark can create that explosion. And so we see this often, for instance, right now we're seeing it in markets. The prices of commodities rising and fall in a short period of time in a direction or trend that might reverse suddenly. So that's a financial example. But we see these in social trends as well. We see them in scientific trends. And we're starting to see them in businesses. So for instance, some of the biggest businesses, IT, the big, the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons of the world are starting to become much more volatile and having to lay people off. The path wasn't quite so, it's not quite so clear anymore. Their financial situation is also a little dire. So the U is the uncertain. And uncertainty occurs when events and outcomes are unpredictable. So the cause and effect are not well understood, and previous experience may not apply to the situation. So we really are unsure which direction the situation will go. So if we look at today, very recently, you may have heard about California, which has been through, by the way, about a decade worth of drought. And even in other parts of the United States, they're talking about how water is becoming more and more scarce. Entire lakes are starting to disappear. But then over Christmas, that all shifts, and all of a sudden they are facing floods that are causing tremendous damage. We saw the floods in Pakistan last year, and many of those floods did not even originate in Pakistan. The source of the flooding was in other countries. And so, these moments of we're not sure what the events will be and where they will take us. We're seeing it also start to emerge in many of the geopolitical, environment, particularly with China and Russia, with some of the aggression, not sure what is, the security environment is going to look like. And there are shifting powers and as well, which also leads us into that domain of complexity, which involves a multiplicity of issues and factors and actors as well, some of which might be intrinsically connected and interconnected. So the relationships between items and people, however, are very difficult to understand. And the other thing is when a change occurs, it can create unintended consequences and down the line. So we see something happening in one part of the world or one part of the organization or one part of the country, and the next thing you know, something else pops up over somewhere else that we did not anticipate. But you can, if you were to trace back, you might be able to find the link, or you may not. Cause and effect might be obscured by many layers as well. So it's not clear what factors are important in the decision-making process. So finally, the ambiguity. And ambiguity is really shaped by a lack of clarity. It's the difficulty of understanding exactly what the situation is. We're not actually sure what the situation is. And once we look at the situation, it might have elements of complexity, volatility, and uncertainty as well mixed into it. And so you might be looking at something and misreading information or misinterpreting information. So during ambiguous situations, all the facts are not clear. And the goal or intended outcome might not be evident to all parties involved. So this is when you're certainly dealing in complexity, coming to agreement on the problem might even be the challenge because it's so ambiguous. And we're seeing this rise even more now with the introduction of greater and greater misinformation into systems, as well as disinformation into systems. And I tell you right now, as you're probably aware, that artificial intelligence is only going to make ambiguity, is only going to increase ambiguity because we're not going to be sure what is true and what is not true, and what is real and what is not real. So what we're seeing in the leadership domain then is we have to almost say, is that control superhero model sufficient anymore? It's not that we don't need somebody who can lead, but there is a trend towards defining leadership from the superhero of the leader to many, which is leadership is collective or it's shared. So the implication is that if you're an executive or a leader in the hierarchical sense, you increasingly need to learn how to awaken and access and deploy leadership skills within and across the system. The other part of the blurring might be a result of my internet connection when I change it. It might clear once it's gone through after a few seconds. I'm not sure. I'll just pause for a moment and see if it gets clear. Let me stop sharing, and I'll share one more time, see if that helps. I don't know if this will help or not.
It did for me.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
James,
better. That's better.
it's a lot better now.
All right. Let me know, and I can just do that over and over again. If
Nope, it has gone back blurred.
Oh. That is my, it's probably the internet connection and not anything on your end or my end. It's between our computers that's happening.
It's better on our end.
Okay. So leadership is increasingly seen as a set of behaviors that anyone can demonstrate, and effectiveness depends on the context. And in a condition of, in the VUCA world, there's a need for emergent, innovative, and collaborative leadership, and it can be learned collectively and collaboratively. And the question is, can it be learned collectively and collaboratively as well? So that notion of you being the leader, that that you as a leader need to almost resist being that superhero and having the answers, and really start being the person to reach out. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about what that looks like in a few moments. So Ronald Heifetz, who is among the world's foremost authorities on the practice of and teaching of leadership, and he's at the Harvard Kennedy School of Business, co-created this, co-developed the adaptive leadership framework. And what Heifetz says is that you really have a spectrum of challenges, and some of them on the left here are technical challenges, and that's where you bring your technical expertise. And many of our problems are technical, and so you have the solution, you've experienced them before, you have the technical expertise. If you don't have it, you can go out and get the technical expertise to be able to solve the problem. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what we call adaptive work, which is, we don't know who owns the problem. We aren't quite sure what the problem is. There may not be a solution to the problem or a clear solution to the problem. If we introduce a solution, it may have unintended consequences, and we need to be quite aware of the system in which the problem resides. So this is the spectrum in which you are functioning as leaders in this whitewater context and environment.
Sorry,
And
James.
yes.
Just 1 minute. If we can ask everyone to just turn off their cameras, and let's see if we, this will be much better. Just turn off your cameras, please. Thanks.
Okay. Hopefully that will help. And I noticed that Douglas Williamson said that there are problems with Zoom as well. So hopefully those are not affecting us. So in a VUCA world, not all problems are created equal. And this is the really important point, and this is what we're going to really unpack today, is in a VUCA world, how do we distinguish what kind of problem it is that we are dealing with, and what are the strategies or the leadership responses to addressing each of those types of problems. So we have poll number 2. And this one has several questions, so you'll need to answer 6 different questions. So we'll start that poll, and let's just see, we're going to leave it open for 1 minute and see how you respond to all those questions. And I do realize that I'm asking you questions before I've delivered the material. So it feels like a test, but you haven't learned the content yet. Okay, I'm starting to get some responses. And don't worry, again, it's all anonymous, so give it your best shot. And Georgia, will go longer, we'll give it another minute now. Whoop. And I see someone is using annotation tools on here. Those will disappear when you change the screen. I believe it is Sonia that is using the. Okay, so we have in the chat, we have some people who are saying, and if you scroll down, you'll notice there are other questions. There are 6 different questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then reshare my screen again. Yeah. So the poll should still be on top, hopefully. All right, we're going to end the poll now. George, I'll let you click the button so that we were not working at cross purposes. All right, and let's share the results. Okay, so needing to learn how to bake chocolate chip cookies, an example of what kind of problem? Most people said simple. Okay, yes, it is. Learning how to lose the weight after we've eaten the chocolate chip cookies is a different story, however. But learning how to bake them is a simple problem. And it's because, I'll explain why in a moment. So a curry onion, green olive poppy cheese bread is an example of something simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. So it is complicated. In this example, it is complicated. So let me just go back to making the chocolate chip cookies. Anytime you can follow a recipe and end up probably getting a decent result is a simple problem. It is very much a recipe. It's about standard operating procedures. There's a bureaucratic response. You can create a checklist, simple problems. What makes the curry onion, green olive, poppy cheese bread complicated is that there are many things happening, but you can see the different parts of what makes it up. You can see the onion, the green olive, the poppy, the cheese bread, the cheese. And so in the work world, those are different areas of expertise are required to solve the problem, but we can differentiate between those different areas of expertise, and we need to coordinate them. The French baguette is an example of complex, because when you open up that, you cannot see all of the elements that came into making it. So they're all mixed together, and you really can't discern between the butter and the flour and all the things that are in there. It just looks like a piece of bread. So there's even though you know there are many things in there, you can't separate them out. So that's what makes it different from simple and complicated. Raising a child is absolutely complex. Just because you've raised one child successfully doesn't mean the other one is going to be the same. All children are different. There is no book. I mean, there's plenty of books, but there is no definitive book on how to raise a child. And they're really, it's by trial and error that you really learn how to do it in the moment. And that is what defines complexity. Just like the French baguette, you can't really separate out the different elements of raising a child. I'm going to do 1A this morning and 2B this afternoon doesn't really work that well. Responding to an active shooter in the market is what kind of problem? It is chaotic. Absolutely, it's crisis management, and it is absolutely chaotic. There are elements later on, as I'll break down a different example into its component parts that follow that would be complex and complicated. And then sending a rocket to the moon is complicated for the same reason as the green onion, or sorry, the curry onion, green olive, poppy cheese bread. Sending a rocket to the moon, just like working in an emergency room, is complicated because there are many areas of expertise required to launch a rocket. And there are many areas that we need to coordinate. So anytime you're coordinating areas of expertise, it's complicated. Whenever you're not quite sure what's happening, it becomes complex. So we can stop sharing and we can close that poll and we'll move on. And I'm going to talk about these 4 domains of complexity. So I'm going to start unpacking these a little bit more. So the first domain is the domain of it's the domain of best practice. We do have lists and processes and procedures and policies that can address those problems. There are bureaucratic responses to many of those problems. As long as you follow the processes and procedures, the chances are you will come out the other end with a resolution or an answer to the problem. So this is really the domain where what you do is you assess the problem, you categorize what needs to happen, and then you respond. And so, every time we do something new for the first time and we write up the standard operating procedures, we've assessed the situation, we've categorized it, and now we have a response that every time this problem comes up, we can go back and pick up our standard operating procedures and respond to it the same way. They're often repetitive, and they have an endpoint as well. Simple problems. You face these every day, many, many simple problems. Even if we're in an airplane, for example, before they take off, the problem is we have to get this plane off the ground. There are lists of all kinds of procedures and checklists that they go through. They can take that plane off the ground. Complicated problems is the domain of experts. So simple problems, domain of best practice. Complicated problems, the domain of experts. When, as I talked about, the sending a rocket to the moon is an example of this. You have many areas where you need to bring different domains of expertise to the table, and what you need to do is you need to coordinate them. You need to make sure that they happen in the proper sequence, and you will find that you might rely a little bit on some of the simple standard operating procedures for each of those domains. But as a leader, your response to a complicated problem is to assess, analyze, and then respond. So analyzing the problem. So the areas of expertise need to take a look, apply their expertise in the analysis, and then provide a solution. If the solution doesn't work, we go back and analyze, we assess it, we analyze some more, and we respond again until we get the outcome that we want. So simple problems, assess the problem, come up with a categorization list, and then implement that list. Complicated, we assess the problem, we analyze it using our expertise, multiple domains of expertise if necessary, and then we implement the solution. Both of these areas or domains of problems are what we call, they fall into the ordered category. And in this universe, it assumes that there's a cause and effect relationship, and that they're predictable, and that a right answer can be determined. In other words, we know when we've implemented the right answer because data tells us, or we've followed the proper procedures. And we can always look at the facts and come up with a solution to the problem. So you probably are quite familiar with these in your day-to-day work as well. Complex problems is the domain of emergence. And in this domain, we're starting to get into, as we talked about, some of those VUCA factors, right? The volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this domain, the leader's job is to really probe, because it's not clear even what the data is, right? We're not even sure if this was misinformation. We're not sure where the problem started. We're not sure what the problem is. There's disagreement on the problem. All those things that we talked about when we described VUCA are in this area of complex problems. And so this is where we need to probe, right? We need to put on our detective hat and try and figure things out. There may not be a solution necessarily. And so we want to assess the situation. Once we probe and we've done experiments and we've gone out and engaged people and consulted and heard many stories about this, patterns will start to emerge, right? Through our assessment, this is the domain of patterns and emergence. Once we start to see trends and patterns, then we can respond to those trends and patterns with other experiments, hoping that we're having an influence on the trends and patterns. That oftentimes your response to a complex problem is not a solution, but it's about influencing or creating a shift. So that's complex. Chaotic is really the domain of rapid response. It's where you find crisis management. And you're probably all familiar with this, if not directly, then indirectly. And that is where you act. The first thing you want to do is stabilize the situation, and then you want to assess the situation, what's going on, and then you want to continue to respond. But the rapid response teams, when they're dealing with a security issue, a medical issue, they're always acting, they're assessing what impact their acts are having on stabilizing the situation, and then they respond, and then they assess again, and then they act. And so it's this cycle of continuous acting, assessing, response, acting, assessing, response, and to try and de-escalate whatever the crisis is in the moment. And so that's the fourth type of problem. Now, the ones down below are what we call unordered. And they are very much around where there's no immediate apparent relationship between cause and effect in the complex and the chaotic. All we know is something happened, but we don't know why it happened. And so we can't deal with the symptoms at this point. We can only deal with the cause, but we need to explore the symptoms to be able to put in a longer-term solution or a longer-term influence or have a longer-term impact. So my hope is, even just in looking at this, you can see, okay, we have a number of, I'm facing all kinds of problems in every day. And not all problems that I'm facing are equal, therefore not all problems require the same kind of leadership. I'm going to share with you a brief story that happened very recently. And that was somebody who on a Thursday morning had a heart attack and sent a message to their family. Unfortunately, they were not able to get to a phone, so they sent a text. The first family member received the text an hour later because it was early in the morning. They woke up, they saw the text. They immediately started going into action and contacting other family members. They also tried to phone this person. The person was not able to answer the phone. They were still conscious. They sent a text back saying, I can't get to the phone. So that immediately, but I'm having a difficult time breathing and I have chest pain. Immediately calling 911, the ambulance, getting them into to the location. This person was actually an hour and a half outside of the city, and so there was a number of things that had to happen, which was calling 911 in the city was not the same 911 that was going to needed to be called to be able to respond. So getting patched through 2 or 3 different levels of police, etc., to the right 911, getting them, and then getting in the car and starting to drive to the location. So you can see how this is very much in the chaotic, right? And the chaotic is all about acting, trying to de-escalate, trying to stabilize the situation. So as this person is responding to the situation, they are acting, they're assessing whether or not their actions are appropriate, and then they are responding, and then they're acting again, right? So that's the chaotic. But in this domain of this person having a heart attack, there are other things at play. So what is going on is that you have other things. So in the when this person is taken to the emergency room, it starts to move into the complicated, because that's where different people, different doctors with different expertise are doing different things, and they're assessing what's going on, they're analyzing the situation, they're responding, and each one is contributing to trying to repair, ensure that no greater damage is done, right? So that's complicated, because there's somebody in that room who is coordinating all of the doctors standing around that table. And they've done this before, they have the expertise. In many ways, each one of them, for them, it's simple, they're following their protocols, right? And if they don't follow their protocols, then there could be a problem. The next thing that becomes, that also kicks in, and notice these are not necessarily happening in order. is some of them are happening simultaneously, and some of them you're bouncing around from 4 to 2 to 1 to 3 to 2, which, you know, and maybe back to 4. So these are not a sequential, it's not a sequential model. The complexity of the situation happens after, when the family needs to start talking about this person's autonomy, because they're 90 years old, they're very autonomous, they're still driving, they're still spending time alone at their cottage outside the city. And so now the family has to talk about autonomy. That moves us into the area of complexity. Because the idea is that we can have different perspectives, you have different values, you have different desires and wants that are happening here. And you can't just say, well, you know what, this person's not going to be able to drive anymore and they're not going to be able to go to the cottage, or if they're going to have somebody there with them. Well, that makes it now, which of their family members are going to go with them when they have to work or have other things and they can't stay at the cottage. Even if they're at the cottage, then how do we make sure that the phone is nearby? So this is starting to get into the area of complexity because it involves multiple parties with different interest perspectives. And what really is autonomy? And how do we define autonomy? Right? And I'll tell you right now, that is the area that is currently being avoided by the family because it is filled with emotions, filled with that complexity, and they'd rather sweep it under the carpet than actually deal with it. This is also true in the work world, where we see complex problems and we hope they will go away. If we just let it go away, I won't have to deal with it. I would much rather deal with the simple and the complicated. The problem is, when you don't deal with complex problems, they very quickly turn into chaotic problems. And then you're left with a crisis. The thing is that there are many people who like crises because they work very well under pressure. And that may be some of you as well. It is me. I love working under pressure. I was in the Army. I know how to deal with a crisis situation. I do not like the touchy-feely, the engaging, the going out and the uncertainty and the VUCA of complex. It makes me very uncomfortable. But as leaders, you need to be aware that you need to work in that domain. Underlying all this, as you may have figured out by now, is that all of us have preferences as to which type of problem we prefer to address. There are some people who like simple problems, and they will try to simplify everything. My colleague, some of you know her, Ingrid Richter, and I are very often different places when we're dealing with a problem. Ingrid likes complex problems. She loves getting her hands dirty and going in there and having conversations. And then James, I like to simplify, right? So I'm a process person. I'm trying to create the checklist. And she says, James, we're not ready to make the checklist yet. So we keep each other in check, because Ingrid would make everything complex. I would simplify everything. And neither one of those responses in and of alone is actually appropriate. So be aware of what your preferences are, and then try to assess what kind of problem am I facing and what kind of leadership response is required. Do I need to assess, categorize, respond because it's a simple problem? I need to create a checklist or a process. Do I need to assess, analyze, respond, and coordinate many areas of expertise for this problem? Is it a complex problem that's going to take a long time for us to understand, and therefore we need to probe, we need to set up experiments, and we need to assess what's happening and respond, or do we need to immediately act and try and stabilize the situation? We're going to be just put you into breakouts in a couple of minutes to have a conversation about this. But I want to just talk about this in the context of a problem that we've all faced, which is, we are going to go into breakout. Yes. So real life problems. We're going to put you in groups, approximately 3, there may be 4 participants per group, and that's okay. We'll see how many it puts us in. You'll be given 10 minutes to have the conversation. Your task is, and I've put this in the chat box as well, each participant identifies and shares issues or problems they're currently facing that generally fall into each of the first 3 categories of problems. So 1 problem per participant category. And by the first 3, I mean it's either simple, complicated, or complex. Okay, just talk about those ones, because I'm hoping that if you were dealing with one that was in the 4th, the chaotic, you probably wouldn't be here right now. So you're probably not dealing with that. But you know, maybe there are some, but what are the characteristics of the issue or problem that has you assign it to that category? So what makes you think it is simple? What makes you think it's complicated? What makes you think it's complex? Right? So just, I know you're all facing all kinds of problems, but just practice at trying to identify which domain you might put this problem in. It might be possible that there's multiple domains as well. You might say part of this is chaotic, and or part of this is complex, and part of it is complicated, or it might fit in all 3. It's okay, whichever you think. And then just for fun, is anyone facing a chaotic problem? What is it? What makes it chaotic? So those are in the chat box. We're going to give you, the chat says 5 minutes, because I made a change. Let's give a full 10 minutes. Georgia, we'll give a full 10 minutes to this.
Okay, just get ready to accept the invitation to join the rooms. Are you seeing the invitation? I don't know why, what's happening. Oh. James is not opening the rooms. All right, let me recreate because it's not opening the rooms at all, James. All right, James, just having a little technical problem here. Where it's not opening the rooms at all.
Let me try one here. Not automatically. 250. So we're going to make it 50 rooms.
I don't know if that's a challenge, but yes, 50 rooms, not opening the rooms.
Okay, let's see. I've just clicked on it. Okay, is everyone able to see?
No, it's still saying, not seeing it.
Some people are in rooms right now.
Some people are in rooms?
Yeah.
No, not from my end. I'm not seeing anybody in rooms.
Yeah, it's not open. Okay, well, let's not worry about the breakout rooms. Let's have a bit of a conversation, and let's see in the chat box. Or if you want, you can raise your hand, and I will just lead a conversation for a few minutes around some examples that you have and what kinds of problems they are. Or if you have a problem and you're not sure, maybe we can figure it out together. We'll just not worry about breakout rooms. We already heard that Zoom is having some problems, so this might be one of the problems that Zoom is having. We'll work around it. So who's facing an issue? We have 253 people here. I'm sure some of you have a problem that you're dealing with, an issue or a problem. And if you go down to reactions at the bottom of your screen and you click on that, you'll see it says raise hand. You can do that. Leadership is bravery. Okay, Christine, I see your hand is up. Let's have a conversation. And then Ornella, I see as well.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much.
So, Christine, I think we have somebody in the background. Please.
Yes, good morning. I am happy to be a part of this session. I've really been learning this morning.
Yes.
I smile.
Okay, just one moment.
Jerome Davis, will you please, Jerome Davis, will you please close your mic? Thank you.
There we go.
Jerome Davis.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, again. I am happy. I've really been enjoying the session and I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm Christine Thompson. I'm from Tax Administration. I smiled when the question was asked. One of the colleagues on the platform asked a question. We are trying to have this training session and then we find ourselves in this position and then somebody asks, how would you define what is happening right now? And I think I would really enjoy a discussion on that. Somebody said it is complex, somebody said it's complicated. And I think we could just look at what is happening right now.
When you say right now, are you talking about this whole Zoom and the not being able to see? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and how we relate to the training, yes, and how we find a solution. Because that's a question that was asked right away.
Yeah. So Christine, I'm going to ask you. I think you said you had a sense of what it might be, and if you could repeat that, that would be great. What did you think it was?
The first thing that comes to my mind is best practice. What do you do? What do you do in a situation like that, like this? Then you find an alternative like what you just did. You say, okay, let us discuss it together, or let us look at a problem that we have that we can simplify, not simplify, that we can diverse into these different areas. And then we look at if we were to fix the problem, then we would require someone with some kind of expertise. And so that would bring some complexity to the situation. But that's just my views on it. I'll be interested to hear what others have to say.
Okay. So what would others say? I have a bit. I'm also seeing some other problems coming up in the chat, and I'll return to those in a moment. But this issue that we're facing with Zoom right now. Anybody? I think Christine is saying there's elements of simple to it and some elements of complicated to it. Anybody have agree or have a different? If you agree, go down to the reactions and click the check mark, and if you disagree that it's simple / complicated, click the X.
Hello. Good morning.
Yes, hello.
This is Karen.
Hi, Karen.
So I have one question.
Yeah.
In this case, was Christine defining the problem as complicated or the solution? Because aren't we then required to define the problem first before we determine what possible solutions there can be?
Okay, so that's interesting. So I think the problem, we need to be clear on what the problem is. The problem. I would say the problem and the solution kind of go hand in hand. If the problem requires a response that is sort of standard operating procedures, checklists, protocols, then the problem and the solution reside in simple. If the problem requires, as we define it, or part of the problem, because remember, a problem could reside in multiple domains at once. Part of the problem might reside in the complicated, and therefore the solution resides in the complicated. And it's an interesting point that you've raised, because oftentimes people define the problem as, people misidentify the problem and apply the wrong solution. And so that's when you have the mismatch. And I think that's what we're really trying to say here we want to avoid, is let's be clear that we align the same solution with the type of problem. So we could, first of all, say this is a very simple problem. If one person cannot hear, then it's very simple. We have a checklist we go through. So go down to the mute button, unclick, check your speakers, check your microphones, etc. Right? So you can pretty much go down, and eventually you're able to hear. If the problem with what's going on today is is more about it's a network issue, and not only a network issue, but may also be a computer issue and a network issue. You may need to have different specialists come in, right? And so and then you need to coordinate them, because the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the computer is working. The next thing we need to do is we need to make sure the network is working. The next thing we need to do is we need to call Zoom, and we need to make sure that they get their technical people on this, right? So we're trying to coordinate all these areas of expertise. That becomes complicated. So I would be inclined to say that this really does fall in the area of complexity, because it's not just a checklist solution. If it was, we would have solved the problem already. That's how I would tend to categorize this one. So I think you've raised an important point, though, is it the problem or is it the solution? And however we define the problem, we want to align the solution accordingly. We could also debate the longer term issue about whether or not we want to continue learning online, and that then becomes a complex problem, because now you're dealing with different people want to learn differently. People don't want to go back in person. People don't want to have to commute. And so now you've turned it whether or not we continue to use Zoom and deliver online learning, that then becomes a complex issue that we deal with. And we might need to experiment. We might need to go out and survey, that kind of thing. And so Loya is saying down here, read the Zoom issue. We know we can call an expert, the office IT person, who will help define the problem quickly, which will lead to a quicker solution than having a non-technical person tinker with all the possibilities. So yes, knowing who to call, because it may be, if it's one area of expertise, it becomes a simple problem. They just go through their checklist. If it's multiple areas of expertise, it's complex, because you have to coordinate those multiple areas of expertise. So that is how I distinguish between, right? So the baker follows a recipe to be able to bake cookies. The restaurant has a sous chef, a baker, a pastry chef, somebody at the counter. So that's a complicated scenario because you're coordinating. But each one of them is dealing with a simple problem. Multiple simple problems become complex problems. That might be the way to. Yeah. So I mean, Natasha. Yes, complex. I misread that as complicated, and then I read your examples. And yes, those are absolutely transportation issues. Interregional transportation right now, particularly given that Liat seems to have decided they don't want to stay in business anymore. Personality issues, family issues. I'm going to scroll up and see, high staff turnover. I'm just picking and choosing from the list. High staff turnover is absolutely complex. We don't know why. We don't know where the problem originates. Different people might be leaving for different reasons. We can't apply a one-size-fits-all solution to this, right? So that is absolutely in a complex area. So we need to probe, analyze, and we need to probe, assess, and then respond when we're dealing with that level of complexity. HR department to call on the staff members to find out what is causing them to be late. Again, this is a complex problem. If for no other reason than what Natasha said, why HR not their immediate manager? So now we're really, who is the right person to respond to this? So when we have that lack of clarity, that ambiguity, we're now working in the domain of complexity. So HR might need to be involved, but so might the manager, but so might other people. This may be a medical issue. It may be a domestic issue that needs to be resolved, right? So, and I'm noticing, Jeffrey, you said multiple simple problems form complex problems, not complicated ones. Multiple simple problems so a simple problem, remember, is a checklist. If I have my job and I do my checklist, and you have your job and you do your checklist, and Natasha has her job and she does her checklist, and Sonia has her job and she does her checklist, Somebody just needs to coordinate us. That's complicated. Right? We're all able to clearly define what I need to address, and if I do this, I'll be able to address it. And so we need to coordinate it. The complexity issues are when we don't know what the problem is, we don't know what the cause of the problem is, we don't know what the solution will end up being, we don't know if the solution is going to be the right solution, we don't have the data to be able to analyze the situation, we don't have the money, we have competing perspectives. Every time, and all of you have faced this, every time you face stakeholder groups, and this is apparent in the United States, maybe it's because I'm reading US news too much, but you know, gun violence in the United States is a complex problem, right? Yeah, so multiple, you know, because you've got political influence going on, you've got lobbyist influence going on, right? Complex, complex, complex. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to just move us forward a little bit in this. I'm going to very briefly talk about how do we deal with those complex problems, because today we're going to focus not on the simple, complicated, or chaotic. We're going to focus on the area of complexity. Yeah, well, you know, and I'm looking at Juliet saying, you know, sometimes we turn simple problems into complex, complicated, and chaotic ones when we allow problems to stay unresolved or unaddressed, and then they become major challenges. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, okay, yes, Natasha, chaotic in the moment, complex in the long term. I'm going to use the pandemic in a few minutes as an example to show how that kind of works as well. And I'm trying to figure out, first of all, okay, there we go. So working with complexity. When you're working with complexity, look for patterns and use a diversity of approaches. Okay, you want many faces, many stories, many models. You want to look at the system and what are some emerging trends. Diversity matters. You need to look at many sources of information. You need to look at what's beneath the waterline and see, you know, what are we not seeing here? You need to ask questions. You need to challenge the questions you're asking to make sure that they're not, you know, because they're always value-laden. You know, where are the biases in what we're looking at? Because bias brings in more complexity. So when you're looking at complexity, one of your major roles is how do we build some resilience within the system, because it needs to pull and it will move and it will shift. So you need to assume dependence on the context. Context matters when we're talking about complexity. So when we're, you know, I'm just going to leave this slide up there. I'm not going to read the slide. You can read the slide. I hope you can read the slide. It might still be blurry. When you get the slides, you'll be able to read the slides. But when you're talking about something that's volatile, right, and you'll see a combination of the VUCA, you're not usually just dealing with the V or the U or the C or the A. You're probably dealing with all four at the same time. But volatility, you want to be able to accept the change. You want to say, you know, there's going to be change. In a volatile world, there will be change. You need to build in some slack into the system and some wiggle room for unaccounted issues, right? So let's build in a bit more space in time. Let's build in a little bit more, you know, in our indicators. Perhaps we want to find, you know, we want to reduce the percentage we're willing to accept, because in a volatile world, if it gets too close to the, let me see if this helps. If it gets too close to that border of what we're prepared to accept, then you know, we may not be able to respond fast enough. So you want to build in some wiggle room in the system so it allows you some space to respond. You want to take a look at various scenarios as well. What can I expect? And what might we expect? How fast might this change? You know, we're all quite aware that, you know, if you've got gas going, it will explode quite quickly. But oxygen doesn't explode. I'm sorry, oxygen also explodes quite quickly. I'm not a scientist. This is probably something I shouldn't even be trying to venture into as far as examples. But some things explode quickly, some things explode less quickly. They just catch on fire. Which is this that we're looking at? Is it gonna blow up in our faces if we're not constantly on it? Volatility. Uncertainty you really want to go out and look at diverse viewpoints. Go out and talk to as many people as you can. Talk to different communities. Talk to the unusual suspects. Don't always go back to the stakeholders who are constantly knocking at your door. You already know what they're going to say. Go to the remote parts of the country and ask citizens there how they're affected or how they might be affected by a particular idea or what they're being affected by. Get really clear about how this is affecting different groups. You want to monitor key metrics as well and see how those are changing. Regular reviews, regular postmortems, because remember, you're probing, assessing, and responding. So you want to constantly get, what information are we seeing now? Let's assess the situation in the context of that information. Do pilot projects, right? In the C in complexity, now this is a little confusing because the model, which is called the Kinnivan framework, which is that circle that we were talking about, it talks about complexity down here. And VUCA talks about complexity. In the model, the complex problems have all of VUCA, including the complexity. So it's complexity nested within complexity. But let's just keep our mind around complex. You want to communicate early and frequently. You want to keep all parties informed. You want to keep the dialogue open. You want to encourage collaboration, because not one team will have the answers or the expertise or the resources to be able to deal with a complex problem. You're going to need all hands on deck to be able to address some of these complex issues. Use multiple models and frameworks. So, looking at hurricanes, for instance, you've got the National Hurricane Center, right? Their hurricane model, and you've got the European model. And I think there are some others, but those are the two dominant ones. If you only rely on one, the chances, it might be fairly accurate, but they always use more than one model when they're trying to predict hurricane pattern, right? Because hurricanes are complex. They can shift quickly. So if you use more models, you can get a little bit more clarity about where that trajectory might be. So use different models. When they're looking right now at inflation, they're using the consumer price index. Well, that's only one indicator. You need to look at employment. You need to look at other, models that include gas and food, models that don't include gas and food. You need to look at different, and then you get a much fuller picture of what are some of the trends and what's moving faster and what's moving slower. So diversity is the number one consideration when you're dealing with complexity and complex problems. When you're dealing with ambiguity, you want to perform tests to bring clear understanding to the ambiguous information. Be prepared to change as more information comes in. So, how much visibility do we have into this issue? Are we only able to see the surface, or are we actually able to see beyond some of that? Can we pull back the curtains and look through? Can we see through the noise? Because there's a lot of noise out there right now, and that's what makes it ambiguous. What do we need to be able to see through the noise and get some clarity on the information? What information do we need to discard? What information do we need to question? What are the biases again? Always ask yourself in the ambiguity place, what are the biases, the filters that we're filtering our information with that might not be having us see as clearly as we want? So you want to assume dependence on the context, assume it's always subjective, right? And that it's always evolving. You want to anticipate, adapt, explore. This is where you put on your detective hat, is when you're working with complex problems. Complex problems are slow. You will not solve them in 24 hours. You will not solve them in 48 hours. Chances are you might not solve them in 6 months. Some you might, right? So there are small complex problems, but most of our complex problems that we're dealing in the public sector are big. They may take many years to solve, and they may never be solved. You might just be creating a shift. You'll never solve the healthcare problem, for example. You will create shifts in how healthcare is provided. What healthcare needs to respond to will shift and be different, depending on what the issues are. So I want to use an example that we're all familiar with and walk you through this very briefly, because I think we're getting clear on what these are. But one is as is the pandemic. So as an example, in the pandemic, I want to just show you how that would unfold here. So in the pandemic, COVID-19, the simple part of this is enforcing community safety standards. Okay, so that's a simple problem. How to enforce community safety standards? Simple because we have processes by which we enforce safety standards. We just simply need to, we may need to adjust our our operating procedures, but we have those. You ask anyone who's in public health, they will tell you, we know how to enforce community safety standards. Talk to anybody that's working in security or policing, they know how to enforce safety standards. So they can do that. It's a simple problem for them. The complicated part is understanding noncompliance. Why are people not complying with the safety standards? We're going to have to bring in some experts to analyze the data around that to be able to provide some insight into it. Complex is the adaptive learning that we're going to have to do to understand and balance multiple priorities, because we've got economic priorities, we've got public health priorities as well. So we have competing.
Always want jam.
What was that?
Then you go in my fridge and wait.
Oh, I think somebody has unmuted themselves. So that's a complex one, and we're still dealing with that, right? Multiple priorities. And then the immediate actions to mitigate community spread was the chaotic. Now remember, I have not, these are not sequential. Obviously, in March of, the weekend of March 13th, 14th, 15th, most places around the world, that's where we were in the chaotic. That's when we had immediate action, and then we started moving into the other domains. So it doesn't always start with one, right? They're not, as I said, it's not sequential, it's just categorized as number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. They can move around, but it's, we could actually even get rid of the numbers to reduce that confusion, potential confusion. So I'm going to share in my, in the chat box, I'm going to share a handout for you, and you can download it. And they are the slides that I'm going to be looking at next. So if you can't see them on your screen because the text is too small, you can download that handout from the chat box. You just click on the document, and you should be able to save it to your downloaded folder, wherever that may be. As you're doing that, I'm going to just walk you through this pandemic response example. So in the domain of simple, again, remember, this is not in the order that we addressed it, okay? This is just in the numerical order. So simple, which is enforcing community standards, we assessed it. Identify the incidents that violate community safety standards. So, well, we've got people who are leaving their houses. So that's an incident. And then we say, okay, we're going to categorize the violations by type. So by geography, we have people in this part of the country that are doing X. We have this people in the country that are doing Y. We have some people that are doing Z at night. And so we've categorized those violations by the different type of violation. And then we respond by refining our compliance guidelines and enforcement rules for each category. And so, and then we might send out people to enforce those rules. But that was a pretty simple one for us to be able to address. Some people might say there was elements of complicated in there. Yes, absolutely. But I want to look at where it primarily resides. It primarily resides in the area of simple. Understanding noncompliance. This required us to assess. We needed to monitor for regular patterns of noncompliance to safety standards. And then we analyzed it. So we got experts in there to analyze the data to find out root causes of noncompliance. So why are people not complying? And so we had different, the sociologists will tell us one thing, medical people will tell us another thing, psychologists will tell us something else. People who work in employment will tell us, here's some of the financial reasons people are not complying. So we look at all this, and it's complicated because we have multiple sources of data, but it's quite clear then that if we're able to, we're going to continue to develop our nuanced compliance guidelines and enforcement of rules. So, but we have multiple areas of expertise that we're getting our data from. Again, it is a it primarily resides in this domain. Right? There may be elements of complexity in there too, and some elements of simple, but it primarily resides in that domain. Complex, adaptive learning to understand and balance multiple priorities. So, we want to probe. So we're experimenting to balance safety with economic and social considerations. We would shut down and we'd have indicators, and it would tell us, where we are on our indicators with COVID numbers going down. And so we'd open up a little bit more. We'd experiment. We're going to open up just a little bit here, or we're going to have mask mandates, and so that would see what that does. So we're trying things out. We don't know what the impact is necessarily going to be if we do masks versus shutting down. Do we need to shut down completely, or can we open up certain areas? Let's experiment with that. So we're assessing. As we're experimenting, we're assessing as we're going through. We're learning as we're going through. You know what? The masks are really helping. And if we keep our masks, then we can have then we can let people go back into smaller gatherings in public spaces. But we're not quite yet ready to go into larger gatherings. And then we respond, right? So we implement those strategies as well. That's primarily in the area of complex. The chaotic, now we go back to March of 2020, we take immediate action to reduce community spread. Lockdown, shelter in place, nobody goes to work. All right, once we've done that, once we've stabilized the situation, we then assess, are our actions having an impact that we want to have? Or is it, or are we having a negative impact, and therefore we need to put in different actions? So we're constantly assessing, but we're trying to stabilize the situation, and then we respond. We find our actions to increase the effectiveness and the equity of this. So that's how, if you look back on the pandemic, you can take a look at the pandemic and you can slice and dice it. But notice that if we had brought a chaotic response, if we had aligned our leadership, act, assess, respond to a complex situation, it would have failed dramatically. We would have, we would have what we had in Canada. Some of you may have heard about our convoy that shut down the city of Ottawa for 3 weeks. That's what you would end up with. You'd have civil unrest, because in the complex situations, you can't just shut down. You can't shut down people, or they will react and it will become explosive. You can't simplify this when it's not simple. So, but there are certain things that are absolutely simple in this. There are elements of the pandemic that are simple, complicated, complex, chaotic. Your job as a leader is to say which part of the problem goes into which category, and then how do I apply the response, action steps to that response. What you also have in the handout and in the slides that we'll be sharing with you is this sort of cheat sheet that will tell you what the domain is, the context characteristics, and we've been talking about that. Not in exactly these words, but I've been talking about those context characteristics. I've also been talking about the leader's job, and so this will help you there. It will give you some danger signals as well. So things that tell you that that things may not be quite working the way you want them to. And so be aware of some of those danger signals, and then the responses that you can bring. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it will help you sort of be able to quickly start to assess an issue that you're facing and say, where do I need to fall into this, and how do I organize my resources to respond appropriately? Okay, time to get you clicking. And this poll has 4 questions. So if you can answer those, if you can answer all of the 4 of those questions, we'll come back and see. And try not to cheat. Don't pull up your cheat sheet or the handout. See if you can do it from memory. Okay? There's no problem if you don't get it right. This is the first time. It's not a test. It's just a a refresher. So don't look onto the handout. See if you can remember. So what is the leadership strategy for simple? And then what is the leadership strategy for complicated, and then complex, and then chaotic problems? You might be able to do this by elimination, by starting off with one that you think you know and then eliminate that for the others, because they are all the same answers, but each question, once you've used it in one, don't give the same answer to two different questions. That's the hint. Remember, simple problems, following a recipe, complicated problems, coordinating expertise. Complex is experimentation, and chaotic is stabilizing the situation. We'll give you a few more seconds. You might have to look behind a window. You might the poll questions might be behind one of your other windows. So move your windows around on your screen if you're not seeing the poll questions. The questions are basically asking, what is the leadership strategy for simple problems, complicated problems, and it has the assess and analyze, respond, probe, assess, respond, assess, categorize, respond, and act, assess, respond. So. Okay, we have 10 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll. Okay, let's close the poll, Georgia. Let's see. All right, share the results. See how you did. As I said, no problem if you didn't get it right. It's the first time. It's taken me 3 years to be able to do this. I still always have to go back to my cheat sheet. So if you got it right, all of them right, you're doing better than I do on a good day. So simple problems. The response for simple problems is C. It is assess, categorize, and respond. You want to assess the situation. You want to categorize things and determine what are the things that we need to do. What's our processes and procedures for this, and then you respond to it. So that is for simple problems, and we have 65% of people said that one responded to that one. For question number 2, what is the leadership strategy for complicated problems? The answer is A. Assess, analyze, respond. So assess the situation, analyze the data, and have your experts provide their views and opinions on what the proper response should be, and then respond to the situation. The next one is, what is the leadership strategy for complex problems? Probe, assess, respond. 70% responded to that one. And I always remember this one because it's about probing. It's not about assessing or analyzing first. It's always about, we need to just peel back the layers of the onion. So I'm probing the onion. And then I'm assessing what I'm seeing in there, and then I'm going to respond. And then we have, what is the leadership strategy for chaotic problems? 73% is act first. You want to stabilize. Remember, it's about calling 911. Whatever you need to do, we need to stabilize it. We don't have time to think this through. We need to just do what is our best. We just need to do what we think is best to be able to stabilize the situation. In the case of the heart attack, you want to give CPR immediately, right? Even if you don't know how to give CPR, it's better for you to do it and assess whether or not you're having having the impact that you want to have than to sit back and pull out the book and try and figure out how to do CPR before you start doing it. So it's always act, assess, and then respond for the chaotic problems. You're trying to reduce the chaos so that then you can do some of the analysis and the assessment to be able to move into the other domains. So we can stop sharing that one and close the poll. Just want to take a look at what I've got coming up next. We're going to skip the breakout. Let's open it up for discussion right now, and just I'll answer questions and thoughts that you may have around this.
While you wait, I put the comment in the chat.
Yes.
And it'll do for my comment.
Okay.
You want me to read it out? Okay. So
You can if you'd like. Yeah. Let's
okay.
People are tired of hearing my voice. Let's hear yours.
Okay. So basically, I was saying that already I feel helped by being in this, because it gives categories for some things you do, in some of it instinctively or by experience, but not always knowing, having had this vocab to attach to how to do it in a structured way. Mm-hmm. So for that, I feel thankful already. Sometimes you just feel it as stress tells you you're in chaos, and less stress tells you that you've got this, and so on. So I thought that whole segment I was enjoying very much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's the model helps to explain. It helps to sort through some of the things that that you might need to do. And as you say, sometimes we do it instinctively, and that's because we have a preference. And so our instincts tell us to how we would want to respond. What I do find, however, and I said this earlier, is that many of us avoid going into that complex area, especially in the public sector, where our tradition over many decades, and in many cases, many centuries, has been a bureaucratic response to things. We treated everyone the same, and therefore everyone went through the same process. What we're finding now is not everyone is the same, that there's much diversity in the system, and that the system needs us to respond appropriately to the level of complexity that is in the system. And that is where you can, if you simplify it, because that is your instinct, you might want to check that instinct, because we're all biased, and ask yourself, is this really a simple problem, or is it really a complicated problem? And then be able to respond appropriately.
Agreed. I wanted to add to instinct, though, experience, because sometimes from experience, you know not to do what you would like to do instinctively, right?
Yeah. No, I absolutely. So that's that self-awareness, right? And experience tells me this is going to be more complicated or more complex than initially thought. And so I need to pause, and I need to develop a new strategy than the one that I would probably have done if I hadn't taken the moment to pause. Absolutely. You will get feedback from the system as well if you've miscategorized a response to a problem. As I said, we saw pushback from groups when it came to the pandemic, because they thought there was overreach, and so we had we responded in very much a chaotic way, or responded to the chaos, and then we started to oversimplify. I was very impressed with governments around the world, because they were dealing with what we call polarity, which is trying to balance economics and public health. And so they were going on this back and forth, right? We open up for a while, and then the indicators tell us we need to shut down, so we shut down for a while. And then some people started to feel you're shutting down too much, right? Or you're taking away, we're starting to feel restricted and restrained. And many governments did not, they were deaf to those voices. And what would have been best to manage as a complex problem, they turned into a chaotic problem. What are your thoughts? I'm just looking at what I've got here. So I'm going to move into, okay, I'm going to skip systems because I think I can do the next bit in, Georgia, how long would you like me, how much time would you like at the end?
Just about 10 minutes.
Okay, so I've got about 7, right? Something like that. Okay.
Just about, yeah.
All right, let me, I'm going to talk about systems gardening. So let me, and so this is an example of working through a complex problem. It's just one example. There are many, many strategies for working in complexity. This is one that's called systems gardening. And so I want to just talk a little bit about how it works. And I'm going to use the analogy of a children's playground. So remember, we're in that domain of complexity where we're probing, assessing, responding. And so what you want to first do when you're working in the system garden is you want to create the context. So what is, it can be, when we use the children's party, it's actually not a party here, this is more of a playground, but I couldn't find the right pictures. So let's just assume that the party is happening in a playground, okay? We start by drawing a line in the sand that is the boundary. So when you're facing a complex problem, draw your boundary and say, okay, we're going to experiment here, but these are the boundaries of the experiment. And this works well in a unionized environment. And I was talking to somebody who works in transport, the public transport, and they said, their drivers and their mechanics are all highly unionized. So when you're doing experiments, there's certain things in a unionized environment, for example, that are not on the table. So in other words, seniority, right, is outside the boundary of experimentation. We're not going to experiment with seniority. Seniority, we don't touch. If our responses start to affect seniority, then we don't pursue that experiment anymore. So you do want to create the boundaries. And so when you create the boundaries, you're going to be playing in those boundaries, and you're going to be bringing in certain elements that you're going to amplify or dampen. Now, when you create the boundaries, it's important to remember that when you become the rule maker, you'll very quickly learn that you need to keep your boundaries somewhat flexible and negotiable. So, maybe we started off by saying seniority is not on the table, it's a non-negotiable. But as you're doing experiments, seniority starts to become something that we may actually want to negotiate because we can see something better if we were to shift from a seniority-based system to a different one. So we need to perhaps engage unions now a little bit more and see, right? So your boundaries can be shifting, they can be flexible. If the data that you're starting to see in your analysis says that shifting the boundary and being flexible in the boundary might actually get you a better result. That's part of the complexity. But you started off with your boundaries and saying, this is where you can play, children. Don't go outside the fence. Except, there's a greater field over there. We have too many people. We need to move the boundaries because we need the full soccer field, as an example. You then introduce probes. We call them probes, what are safe to fail experiments. So, we introduce the basketball zone, the jump ropes, the kickball, game of the week, and then we wait to see if patterns start to form. So we don't, we don't tell people where they're going to go play. We put all these probes in there. And so you say, we're going to try a number of things, and we're going to see which ones attract attention. So this is how you do your pilot projects, for instance. We're going to do, we're going to experiment with A in Kingston. We're going to experiment with B in Ocho Rios, and we're going to experiment with C in Portmore, for instance. Let's just say. And as you do that, you'll start to see that certain things start to get attention. So the game of the week or the tag zone, there's only one person there and she's sitting all alone. That doesn't seem to be too popular. That's data that we start to gather. The soccer zone seems to be attracting all kinds of people to it. And you know, the hula hoop zone, I guess there's a hula hoop zone in there. That actually just emerged. We didn't even create a zone for the hula hoop zone. But so that's telling us something. The basketball zone is also pretty popular. So you start to see patterns that emerge. And so then when the attractors, so that tells us what the attractors are, and you know, it's beneficial. Other children will start to become attracted to it. It will start to grow. And so if it's productive, we don't want to take resources away from that. In fact, we want to give it resources. If it's negative, this is where we may often need the fire hoses, right? So we may need to go over and start to engage that young girl who's sitting all alone over there. Otherwise, she might start to feel that she's left out, not like things that happen with children. We manage the emergence of beneficial coherence with attractors, and then within the boundaries that allows us to address the solution. So remember, all this is within the boundaries, right? So we're not out playing on the road. We're staying within the boundaries, but maybe we need to negotiate our boundaries because soccer is so popular. We need to move the fence back so we get more green, right? So, but we're doing it because the data is telling us this. So if you're noticing complexity, we're setting up the parameters, we're setting up things to test out, and we're letting the system tell us, it's feeding us, what is it that we need to, what do we need to know? And then we need to also remember that whenever we're working in complex areas, that is really context dependent, right? So we know that what works in an urban setting may not work in a rural setting. And so we need to be able to run these experiments in different areas and see what patterns emerge in different areas so that we allocate the resources appropriately in each of those areas. So again, remember, we're probing here, right? We don't know what the solution is. If we had only put in the tag zone, we could have ended up with a completely failed party, right? And so this is telling us that we have to actually be able to see the patterns and respond to positive or negative patterns to be able to make this work. And it's context dependent. So, that's the basic lesson around this is correlation doesn't equal causation. You can't say there's a linear cause. I can't tell you why more people went to basketball and soccer than did the hula hoops or the tag. I could probably do more analysis, but there's no linear cause and effect. So I can't say if I do this, this will happen. But I can say that the system seems to be disposed or predisposed to this. So, children in Kingston seem to be disposed more towards soccer than they, or football, depending what you want to call it, than they do towards hula hoops. That's interesting. Okay. So once you stop trying to figure out the why, and you just say, this is what it is, then it becomes a lot easier saying, we need to respond and put the resources towards soccer and basketball. 6 months from now, that might change, and we may need to shift our resources from soccer to something else. I'm not sure what. So you need to design the garden. So one approach to changing the system is first to outline generally the attributes and qualities of the new paradigm you want. So what is it you're trying to look for? What do we want the future to look like? What do we want that to look like? Let's describe it in as much detail as we can. And then you want to look in the present. Right? So you've defined the future. You want to look at the present and say, where do we find some evidence of that future that already exists today? And you will always find some, right? You will always find something that is a germ that will grow into that flower, or that seed that will grow into that flower. Now, germs don't grow into flowers. Germs grow into wheat, I think. Anyway, but We see it here. We see pockets across the public service of what we call bright spots. Customs immigration, with some of their systems, and how that is, shining a little bit of light on what we want the future of work with businesses to be like, engaging businesses. So let's take a look at that and let's see if we can amplify some of that, if we can get more of that throughout the system. So they may be marginal in the present, but they have the potential to become more prevalent. And so when you see those, you want to start to nourish them so that they gain viability and they start to you want to give the resources, connect them with others, and give them the required capabilities. You want to seed transitions. So the systems gardener approach seeds transitions by identifying and connecting, supporting, spotlighting pioneers of the new system. So you want to highlight those, you want to broadcast them, and you want to water those seeds to enable them to transform and have them emerge and see what happens in different local areas. And then you can see, what we're learning across the system. So what might be happening in customs might be different. What's happening in tourism might be different. What's happening in finance might be different from happening in X, Y, and Z. But we're learning something that is similar there. And then we can start to create linkages between them to create, to bring the system together and catalyze each other. You want to cultivate the attractors. So again, you want to nourish them, get that small group, and then have them give them the resources they need so that they grow. So the aim of systems change is to understand complex systems lies within their dynamic nature. Okay? The patterns that characterize them emerge through endless individual interactions, a process known as self-organization. Systems self-organize, right? Or departments do things and agencies do things they need to do. They self-organize, but together they form a system. And over time, individual interactions form some repeating regularities, and that's where you start to see the patterns. So again, your detective hat, you need to be able to put that detective hat and say, where are the patterns emerging? Where are we hearing the voices that are strong and leading us to where it is that we want to go? Really, the aim of systems to the new equilibrium is that the equilibrium is an attractor, a self-reinforcing feedback loops that will stabilize the system within the new pattern. So that's what you're really trying to do, is that you're a system state is really an emergent state. Okay? It can't be pre-specified or designed at will. It can only be nourished. And the nourishing is the job of the systems gardener, which is you, the leader, because you understand the complex nature of the system. You understand that it's not predetermined, that you have to probe, you have to learn from your probing, and then you can implement responses that take into account the nuances and the differences, and adjust those as you go forward and as the system calls for it. So I'm going to pause there and take any one or two questions at all that anything that is not clear, and then I'll pass it over to Georgia. Georgia, I passed my 7 minutes. I apologize.
That's no problem, James. So we open now for questions. You would either have to raise your hand for me to unmute you, or you can post your question in the chat.
The last 2 slides, so the 2 futuristic slides, let me see if I can find them. So this one, and again, you will get the slides. There'll also be a few other slides in there that we didn't cover today around systems, but that's okay. So you want to design the garden, you want to seed the transitions, you want to cultivate attractors, and then you want to nourish that system by making sure that you're looking for the patterns that emerge, and as you notice patterns, you're adjusting to respond to those patterns. You're either nourishing them or you're trying to diminish them if they're not leading towards what it is you say you're looking for. And by the way, these responses do not apply to simple, complicated, or chaotic problems, right? Those have different responses. The slide on systems change. Which slide on systems change are you referring to? Again, Marcia, we will send the slides out to you as well. I think we have everyone's email address, right, Georgia?
Yes, so we will be sending the slides to everyone.
Okay. What I'm going to do in the short term. This is a huge file, but in the short term, Georgia, I'm just putting it in the chat as well if anybody wants to download it right away.
Okay, wonderful.
So in the chat box, so you will find the slides in PDF format. They're not in color because I saved them in grayscale, so you can print them in grayscale. But Georgia, in the longer term, Georgia will make them available to you as well.
So are there any questions? Remember, you can post. Okay, there's a question. James, how do you prioritize tasks in relation to the 4 domains?
Yeah. So you know, it's difficult because I think it's contextual. It will depend on the situation. So for instance, when I was talking about the heart attack, I had to immediately move into action. I think it will be very clear when you need to move into action in the chaotic because it's crisis management. That's always first, stabilize the situation. The other ones you might find yourself working on some simultaneously. In other words, you can assign people some of the tasks of doing some of that experimentation, depending on what part of the problem requires that. So, and while others you might say, we've got a simple one that we can address really quite quickly. I think it's really just it's part of your judgment to say this is a relatively simple one. I'm going to assign this to this group. Absolutely, the complex is going to take a long time. So you need to put that into place because you're going to be probing a lot. But it's going to also take you a long time. You just determine what your boundaries are, what your experiments are going to be. So it's not so much a matter of prioritizing as it might be concurrent in many cases as well. But you might also have demands from the system. So in other words, the minister might be asking for something. And so you need to respond to the minister by saying, here's what we're doing in the short term, that we'll get some quick responses. Here's what we're doing in the long term. But anytime somebody says, I want you to address a complex issue in the next 48 hours or week, chances are you're going to have to push back on that. I know it's not a great response, but it's a matter of judgment. And Maria, sorry, I love that. Always ask the questions. Don't make assumptions, always ask questions. Your job as leaders is to ask the questions, challenge assumptions, check in on biases so that you don't assume that something is something it's not by accident. You may still make mistakes, but that's okay. And yes, what are the questions to ask? And Maria, I notice you're sending these to me directly. I'm sorry if I called out your name and you didn't intend me to. I apologize for that. And how do we know we're asking the right questions? Because we're making people think. Right? You're making people. You are challenging assumptions. You're getting people to scratch their heads and go, "Oh, I'm not so sure." We need to explore that a little bit further. And when you start getting answers that are not the same answers that you were always getting. Or sometimes it's really quite clear. Yes, this has a really clear answer and we all agree on it. And as you're partway through, keep asking the questions and saying, are we sure that it's still simple? Are we sure it's still complicated? or do we need to adjust our strategy? You might start down the path of something you think is simple, and then something happens and all of a sudden a complex problem pops up, and now you need to deal with that. So remember, it's in constant motion. How do we comment when we're dealing with those same staff orders that which do not welcome the adaptability, may even penalize the effort? Whoa, that's a complex problem in and of itself. And I think I often go into those kinds of situations, I think, by asking questions, getting, not assuming I have the answer, but to ask people questions and have them assume, have them question their own assumptions, gently ask them the questions, have them realize that, you know, if we proceed down a particular path, that it is not going to actually make the situation better. But they need to come up with that themselves. It's really hard to convince people of a different perspective when they are in that space of complexity, because people will hold on to their position. So you really need to say, you know, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve? How can we best achieve this, given the constraints that we have and given the latitude that we have? And what might be the unintended consequence if we, and I love that question, I ask that question a lot, what might be the unintended consequence if we were to proceed down this path and it's not the right path, and we miscategorize this, or we're jumping to conclusions? That's the short answer, given where we are right now. I love the unintended consequences question. I think I saw someone else's hand, but I don't want to make any assumptions. Yeah,
yes, Maria has a hand up.
And then I think we probably have to pause for the day. But Maria, go ahead. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I guess just a comment on what you said. The whole business of wanting to see change, but having the patience to see through, because I think that's where we fall into the pitfall a lot. We want to do something and we want to see the results very quickly. And I think if we're just patient to see the whole process through, then we may bring about real change. But the pitfall is always trying to just do it quickly and not getting anywhere and falling back into the same loop.
Yeah, well, and you are in an environment, you know, the political environment, right, which you run across, where ministers want announceables, right? Because an election coming up and they want to look good, and that's fair, right? I mean, that's how they get that's how they keep their job. And from a nonpartisan perspective, when you're dealing in complexity, what you can feed the minister is some of the results that you're getting as you go through, not the final change. We're not there yet. That's going to take, you know, a year or two or three or longer. But here's what I can say. Here's what this government has invested in this. Here's what we're noticing. Here's the mistakes we've avoided. And here's where this seems to be leading us. And here's what people can expect in the next phase of this. That does give a minister something to be able to say, you know what, we're working on this. I'm listening to my constituents. I'm listening to citizens. And we're doing this without wasting a lot of money making mistakes. And we want to make sure that we use our resources appropriately. You can frame this. You can frame it. Because it's usually the minister who wants it passed. And citizens. Right? But it's never fast enough. We know that. That's why it's complex. Georgia, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, James. This has been I'm sure everyone will agree that this has been a very insightful presentation. Quite a lot of information. You have provided us with some practical approaches to, you know, how we go about dealing with simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. We have some comments in the chat that the presentation was awesome. I saw a comment that this should be a LinkedIn course. Ooh, that's to me just sums it all up. Really, while I'm going to ask Sharika to just post end of session evaluation, we just really want to capture from you very quickly, what were your thoughts about this session? What do you think worked well? What do you think would require any improvement, if any? And that's not going to take you more than 5 minutes. But as Sharika gets ready to post that, look out for that link in the chat. Really want to extend gratitude to the time that James has taken to make this presentation to us. The Leadership Development Webinar Series really is a platform for sharing best practices, for engaging public sector leaders in the discourse among several issues that we continue to grapple with. And this was just another one of our exciting presentations. And James, really just want to thank you wholeheartedly for making yourself available. The commendations are coming through still. Very good presentation, very informative. I certainly, and I am sure participants would agree, that it was very interactive as well. The use of the polls, James, as a sort of knowledge check was very, very, a very good approach. And it also helped to cement and reinforce the content that was delivered. Once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to our participants without whom this would not have been possible. I looked at one point in time and saw that we had over 260 participants online. We do want to apologize though for the little technical challenges we had throughout in terms of the look of the slides, but we promise that we will get those slides to you so you can dive a little deeper into the content that was presented. Sharika has posted a link in the chat for you to just evaluate the session, and we look forward to that feedback. Stay tuned as we continue to deliver exciting, insightful, and beneficial topics in our leadership webinar series. Our next one is scheduled for February. We would let you know the specific date, and we expect to see many more of you here. Spread the word to your colleagues about the series. And this is just one way that MIND continues to ensure that we are fulfilling our mandate as it relates to leadership development and creating that culture within public sector in terms of how we lead. James, thank you very much once again. We are going to keep the platform open as you continue to access that SurveyMonkey link. It's totally anonymous, and your feedback is most welcome. Continue to use the chat, post one word in terms of one word that aptly describes this presentation for you. We saw words such as awesome. Continue to use the chat to provide that quick feedback. So yes, we're seeing informative, relevant, needed more, detailed. We have several useful, educational, insightful. They're coming fast and furious, reflective, wow, resourceful, enlightening, interesting, timely. Thank you so much for that feedback, intriguing. Thank you so much for that. So once you've completed the end of course evaluation, you can feel free to leave the platform. Your feedback is very important to us. Practical is another way, another viewpoint. Case studies would have helped to illustrate the points even more. Thank you. You're getting your props, James. Chaotic, complex, complicated, simple, great presentation. Learning has taken place, right, James? All right, so thank you very much. And just want to alert you though, that in March we have a leadership and transition course, and James will be the facilitator for that. It's a face-to-face course, so James will be here in Jamaica at MIND to deliver that 5-day course entitled Leadership and Transition. And we continue to offer quite a number of other leadership development courses, such as Fundamentals of Leadership, Leading High Performance Teams, Unleash the Leader in You. I mentioned a while ago, Leadership Transition. And so there are many learning interventions to meet your needs. So feel free to contact us so how we can meet those needs. So stay tuned. Thank you very much once again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Georgia.
You're most welcome. Thank you, everyone. And